So hello, good morning. I'm Miguel Eugene from Group 9, and together with Vincent Sy, Paisley, and Marius, we're gonna go discuss the article called The Death of Moral Relativism. The article first introduces us to two parties. One is the conservatives and one is the liberals. The conservative consider our moral relativism a huge issue of American society, while the liberals says otherwise. So the article is discussing how in the 21st century the concept of moral relativism is slowly shifting away. Evidences it could be seen like the music. So for example, what the top 40 music in Spotify nowadays is so much more different than the music is considered as the top music in the 1990s or the early 20s. Similar goes to movies. So for example, nowadays we watch Marvels before we watch like the Godfather stuff. Similar goes to the books, and so the article saying that these changes are factors that indicate that moral relativism are slowly changing, and it's dying. It's basically almost gone. What replaced this concept of moral relativism, on the other hand, is what they call as shame culture or unethical code. This shame culture is a code because it is not something you used to. You need something to measure an act shameful. So this, to make things easier, this is basically the golden mean, but it's not measuring a virtuous act. It's measuring whether an act is shameful or not. So the golden mean is basically by Aristotle. So for example, generous is the middle ground. Excessive generous you can say that it's stupidity, and not generous are selfish people. So basically, it's the same process, but instead of measuring a virtuous act, or the article is in the shame culture is measuring an act and determining if it's whether shameful or not. Now, the criteria used are not the traditional, like for example, family values, gender values, or like other values, whatever it is in the culture. It is now like the concept of tolerable, whether the action is tolerable and it includes, or the action is included or not. So basically, tolerable and inclusion is the criteria used to judge whether an action is shameful or not. So you can see that in this article is saying that shame culture is now replacing moral relativism. An example it provided is the Donald Trump situation. Many conservatives still support Trump because Trump doesn't comply to the concept of moral relativism or even shame culture in general. So for example, they said that Trump still freely express his political values despite many consider it like politically incorrect. Thus, why they're still supporters of Trump. So basically, the article is saying that moral relativism in the 21st century is now slowly shifting away. Now, I would like to share some insights about the article. The first is the article is an event called the paradigm shift, which is the change of ideas, the thought process, or what is considered as normal cultural to shift, basically change. So in this case, it's the transition from cultural relativism into more into intersubjectivism. Now, second is I can't help but notice that it promotes a certain phenomenological perspective, um, because the ethical code is intersubjectively created through the interaction of people. It is saying it proves that the body is lived. The concept of French philosopher Merleau-Ponty, he he emphasized that the body is lived and that we experience the world through our bodies. So in this case, we can see that the interaction between the people gave meaning to certain acts, and then those meaning combined form the ethical code. So in a way, we can see that this concept resembles how the philosophy of Aristotle, which for him he agreed with Plato that there's the concept of soul and body, but for him the body and soul is deeply intertwined. It's always connected. You can't have a soul without a body. You can't have a body without a soul. Rather than he's different from Plato, his teacher, because for Plato he deems that the soul is more superior than the body, and the soul is more like I don't know, it's higher level being than the body. So right, so you can see that through a lived body, through the basic experiences, it can give birth to meanings, and meanings create this ethical code in the article.
Hello, I'm Vince. I'll discuss two minimalist theories from our module that are relevant to our discussion before our group attempt to contextualize it to the article being tackled. Firstly, cultural relativism. The main argument of this minimalist theory is that different cultures have different moral codes, which is why there is no objective truth in morality, since right and wrong are only matters of opinion, and opinions vary from culture to culture. There are consequences if we take cultural relativism seriously, such as we can no longer say that the culture of other societies are morally inferior to ours. But let's say, what of war practices or sacrifices? And for example, me as a Chinese Filipino, which society should I follow? Because I belong to more than one group or society, which is the Chinese and the Filipino. Next, subjective relativism. This minimalist theory is divided into two parts. The first one is simple subjectivism. As the name suggests, this is the simplest version of theory. The second one is emotivism, which begins with the observation that language is used in various ways. Simple subjectivism states the main idea but does not attempt to refine it very much. For example, when a person says that something is morally good or bad, this means that he or she approves of that thing or disapproves of that thing, and nothing more. However, the problem with this is that it cannot account for our fallibility, and none of us is infallible. And number two, simple subjectivism can account for disagreement. Second form of subjective relativism is emotivism. One of its principal uses is in stating facts, or at least in stating what we believe to be facts. In each case, we are saying something either true or false, and the purpose of our utterance is to convey information to the listener. However, the problem is that there are other purposes for which language may be used. Suppose I say, close the door. This utterance is neither true nor false. It is not a statement of any kind. It is a command, which is something different. Its purpose is not to convey information. Instead, its purpose is to get you to do something. I'm not trying to alter your beliefs, but I am trying to influence your conduct.
Okay, now on to contextualizing, or connecting it to the article. So the article begins with a firm statement that the biggest problem in America is moral relativism. So this is the view that that morality is culturally or historically defined as what's right for you may not be right for me, instead of being universal and timeless. So under this assumption of moral relativism, anyone who says anything can be considered to be infallible. This is also under some simple subjectivism, because whatever one believes to be true must be correct. Okay, now the issue with this, according to the article, is that starting with America's new moral code orbits around values like tolerance and inclusion. So this would come from the shame culture now taking place in American college campuses, according to the article, which essentially encourages people to act in such a way that won't result in unmerciful moral crusades on social media. So this new shame culture that has made its way cannot be total relativism, as to decide whether or not someone is worth shaming requires some kind of moral criteria, which cannot be connected or related to moral relativism. It's different. Which means that people are tolerating everything except the intolerant, and all is included except the exclusive. This is according to the article. And talk of good and bad is different to talk about respect and recognition. So an example of the issue that is talked about in the article is of Trump. The conservatives who support him even if they recognize that his views are politically incorrect, simply because he speaks his mind. In this light, he is seen as someone who can be morally infallible, with his supporters accepting his policies because they push back against the moral code. Many conservatives, such as those who support Trump, has used the concept of moral relativism to gather support in the past, as this kind of view cannot account for disagreement. So what this means is that there is no such thing as right or wrong, because there is no disagreement between those who take a stand on different things. So through moral relativism, conservatives would push the idea that each side should simply acknowledge the truth of what the other is saying. What's wrong with this, though, is that if the two sides are in fact disagreeing, like one agrees with the other and the other disagrees, they are in fact disagreeing, this view on moral relativism through the lens of simple subjectivism cannot be considered correct, because if it was, there would be no disagreement at all, but there is, so this cannot be correct. Okay, now, instead of viewing it through simple subjectivism, we will now view it through cultural relativism. So using cultural relativism to view this article may lead one to simply agree with Trump's policies of mass deportation and discrimination, because it is for a different culture from our own. The issue with this is that the policies do not promote the welfare of those who are affected by it, which in fact they hinder their welfare. So how this hinders people's welfare is that by taking individuals away from their families and their livelihoods by deportation, and allowing for discrimination against people simply because of who they are and what they believe. This is not good for people's welfare. In fact, it would hinder it, like as I mentioned. By being a hindrance to people's welfare, there is a clear deviation and defiance from the moral rules that are necessary for society to exist, which are the rules that would protect the welfare of those who live in the society. Through this, we can see that there is something morally wrong with Trump's policies, and using cultural or moral subjectivism will do nobody any good. There are so many issues with using cultural or moral subjectivism, and that's it.
Okay, so to tie it all together, cultural relativism is the belief that different cultures have different standards of morality, and therefore that what is right and wrong is dependent on culture, which was previously debunked. So while subjective relativism is the idea that if the individual is the main source of knowledge, then a moral life is dependent on each individual, which we also debunked. So cultural relativism and subjective relativism are both problematic, since both, more importantly, imply like a futility for the emphasis on search for truth, so that like destroys the idea of any like truth to morality. The consequence of which is the collapse of virtue and the rational structure of moral systems such as religion and law. So the article "The Death of Moral Relativism" by Jonathan Merritt is about how moral relativism is going out of fashion. So Merritt looks at current trends in academia, social media, and entertainment, vis-a-vis things like Trump inclusion and recent films, and uses them to reason that people hold the values of tolerance and inclusion, not in the moral relativistic sense, but in a sense that favors some kind of like justice vis-a-vis things like representation, but in such a way that like it still upholds like some idea of right and wrong, like they're inclusive while still like trying to figure out what is right and wrong. So the article concludes with some commentary on recent American politics, like vis-a-vis Trump. Merritt writes about how the backlash that Trump faces from liberals and moderate conservatives, of his non-inclusionness and like his like general bigotry, is a symptom of the shifting trend in public notions of morality.